Hello, welcome back to Sit and See. I'm Dr. Jared Jones, research specialties, ancient systems of meditation, the cognitive science of meditation, Buddhist philosophy, and the philosophy of science. For the last 72 days, I think, or 73 days, I've been doing Sit and See, although I have skipped a couple of days, which is why we're on video 71, I believe it is. Uh, So, Sit and See is all about teaching people living in the real world how to train in concentration amidst all of the distractions and complications of the real world. And the techniques that I've packaged together come from a number of different places, from the lineages that I've trained in, as well as the academic work that I've done, but mainly from the actual lineages of practice that I've spent time in. So I've been a Tibetan Buddhist for about 21 years, and overlapping with that for the last 6, also been training in Dragon Gate Taoism, which includes Taoist practice, Buddhist practice, and Confucian practice, all under one umbrella. So here we are yet again. Looks like Oates is here. Good to see you, Dave. Who else is here? It takes a while for the system to catch up with what's actually going on. So, um, yeah, had the FPMT test today. I thought it was going to take me 4 hours or something. It ended up being much faster than I anticipated. So with a bit of luck, I passed. We shall see. Oh goodness. Yeah, yeah, yeah. There's the YouTube puts in a somewhere between 15 and 30 seconds, depending on what's going on. Hey, Lang. Yes, yes, yes. Well, the FPMT materials is quite interesting. They took some of the great texts from what would have been and is the line of great texts coming through the Nalanda monastery tradition. This is great line of Indian saints and practitioners of Buddhism that is now only alive through the Tibetan traditions. And this program called the Basic Program, the FPMT, is about studying the major texts in the tradition and then studying sometimes the Indian commentaries, sometimes Tibetan commentaries to understand the meaning of the text. So, for example, the Ornament of Clear Realization is one of the texts. Some of you have heard the story, I've told it before, of Asanga, Venerable Asanga. Venerable Asanga is very, very important in the Mahayana tradition. He was said to have meditated in a cave for 12 years on compassion, and his goal was to have a direct vision of Maitreya, who's supposed to be the next wheel turning Buddha after the current Buddha's teachings disappear. And uh, long story short, he does have a vision after 12 years of hard work. Long story short, and Maitreya teaches him 5 texts, and he brings those 5 texts back to his home monastery, and those then become 5 of the most important texts ever produced in the history of Buddhism. And his brother, Venerable Vasubandhu, produces produces 5 commentaries on those texts, which become once again some of the most important commentarial work in Buddhist history. So contained in this one lineage, you have the writings and so forth of Nagarjuna, Buddhapalita, Shantideva, Chandrakirti, and so on. And those are coming through this wisdom lineage that Venerable Atisha brings into Tibet. And likewise, you have the writings of Venerable Asanga, who is, in theory, getting them from Maitreya, who is, in theory, actually getting them from a Buddha himself, right? And so he brings these teachings mainly to do with method, mainly to do with how do you accomplish all of this using various methods. So on the one hand, you have these great sort of commentarial traditions coming through this single line that are explaining all of the wisdom teachings, and on the other hand, you have things coming through this great line that explain all the method teachings for how a person attains Buddhahood after training on the Bodhisattva path. And these are extremely detailed texts, shockingly detailed and complicated texts, but quite logically laid out. Once you understand the structure of the text, they're very logically laid out. So what this does for a practitioner, for example, is it if you're on the Mahayana path, it shows you very clearly how you go from being what you are to being a Buddha. That's sort of the name of the game, giving you a logical cause and effect explanation of how you go from where you are to the end of the road. So, hopefully, without saying too much, this is a big part of what you find in the tradition. There's also, for those of you who are interested in this sort of thing, there's also this really wonderful tradition coming through called the tradition of mind training, which sometimes I use interchangeably with all the stuff that I do. Um, and mind training can be a catch-all term, but often what it means is that a great saint or great saints left behind teachings that are sort of pithed instructions, like here's how you do this, here's how you do that. When you encounter this, use your mind like this, etc., etc. And they're sort of pithy and punchy, which is quite helpful. So who's coming into the room? We have Sweet and Sour. Good to see you. Jay, good to see you again. And Ty, welcome. And a few others quietly observing in the background, spying to make sure I don't do anything wrong. Recording all my errors to put up on a forum somewhere eventually. Hmm. Oh, there's Luck 108. Ty, thank you very much. So, Ty, let me say this because you do contribute word walk. Welcome back. Welcome back. Because you make a fair number of contributions. Let me say this, and a matter of fact, to everybody who's contributing quite a bit through YouTube, it's fantastic to send a couple of bucks through YouTube here and there because I think YouTube likes that. But if you're going to send more than like $2, even with the subscriptions, honestly, just go to the GoFundMe and sign up. Slide the slider all the way down, or almost all the way down, for the GoFundMe portion, because on GoFundMe, almost 100% goes to me, and you can sign up for a subscription on the GoFundMe also. And then with for example, some of you probably signed up to be members on your iPhone, or you send donations through on your iPhone, and I think probably I think probably when you send that money through, you hope it gets to me. This is what I imagine. You know, I could be wrong, but I imagine that you're thinking, I want to send some money to this person to support what they're doing. Unfortunately, if you send money through an iPhone, YouTube always, if you're sending it through YouTube, takes 30%, which, okay, fair enough. And again, I don't mind sending a bit of money to YouTube and so forth. But if you send it on your iPhone through YouTube, then the iPhone takes 30% also, which means 60% goes to tech companies. That seems a bit steep to me, which means that, for example, if you sent $10, which is a pretty generous donation, for example, if you sent $10, only 4 of it comes to me, which I know probably was not your intent. So if you're on one of the more expensive subscriptions for the channel, downgrade to like the $2 one and go to the GoFundMe and send the rest of that money through the GoFundMe. Slide the GoFundMe slider all the way down so that only a very small amount is going to GoFundMe, and then more of it will allow me to carry on doing what I'm doing here. You know what I mean? Um, Same thing. If you do send in quite a bit of money through YouTube, probably better to send it through Venmo or PayPal or GoFundMe. And then just for the algorithm or whatever, if you want to support that aspect too, then just send through $2 or whatever, just as to sort of keep the algorithm interested. If you're into that kind of aspect. Um, ah, thank you, Ty. Appreciate it. Appreciate it. I just don't want your hard-earned monies to go to waste when I know you didn't intend to send them to a tech company, you know? If you did, fair enough. They're allowing this to happen, and that deserves something for sure. Okay. Let's see. I'm going to change over to the other mic. Give me a moment. Oh, okay. Switching over. Okay, that should be coming through now. Right, my friends, right. So, here we are yet again. What's on my mind for the day is. That's interesting. I didn't realize that. Well, what's on my mind today, because I just finished the FBMT basic program test, which is a pretty. Oh yeah. This mic's going to be way better. It's like pretty obvious, but I have the headset because it allows me to move around and then things in the room and all that when we're doing practice. So here's the wonderful thing for those of you who don't know how deep Buddhist stuff is. Again, this class I don't teach much about Buddhism, but it's on my mind today. For those of you who don't know how deep this stuff goes, you can spend 6 years studying the basics of Buddhism. And the basics will be extremely demanding in terms of your time, your attention, your study, your comprehension. Because just covering the so-called basics, you have to cover, well, what are all of these wisdom sutras, the Prajnaparamitas sutras material? What is all of this? What are they talking about when they say you have no eye, no ear, no nose, no tongue, no body, no mind, no this, no that, no, right? What do they mean by all of this? What do they mean there's no path? What do they mean there's no attainment? What do they mean there's no non-attainment? What does all this mean? Right? And that's just one sutra. The Heart Sutra is this tiny little text. It's just a couple of pages. And so there are voluminous commentaries written on basically every word of the Heart Sutra that come through hundreds of years of commentary. For those of you who have read that text, you'll be familiar with the text, but most of you won't be familiar with the fact that great yogis and scholars of Buddhism through the ages, multiple rounds of geniuses of meditative practice have commented on the text. So that's just one example. And then you have the rest of the Prajnaparamita literature, some of which is intended to be explained by, for example, the writings of Nagarjuna. So then you have things like the Mula Madhyamaka Karaka, the Mula Madhyamaka Karaka, his great text basically refuting a whole bunch of other Buddhist schools and non-Buddhist schools without telling you what they are. and also incidentally explaining a huge amount of the Prajnaparamita literature in terms of its wisdom aspect. Likewise, Venerable Asanga and Vasubandhu explain the method side of the path. How is it that a person goes from being an ordinary person to a Buddha? What are the actual steps that one takes going from step to step to step, right? So one of Maitreya's texts coming through Venerable Asanga, again, this is maybe 3rd or 4th century Common Era, is the ornament of realization. Ornament of clear realization, sorry. And this explains in great detail how a person goes from stage to stage. And then there are texts like A Wheel of Sharp Weapons, which is a mind training text intended to help people overcome self-cherishing, which is the immediate result of self-grasping, but it is one of the driving forces of samsara.
especially from a Mahayana perspective, self-cherishing, where someone is inappropriately emphasizing the self and cherishing the self over the interests of others. This is what's driving the whole process forward. The fact that you see yourself existing in a way you don't exist is the root of the problem. But because you're seeing yourself in a way you don't exist, you then treat yourself differently than you would if you knew how you exist. So, A Wheel of Sharp Weapons is a great text on this, and then there are, dozens of commentaries on the text. And then, of course, there are texts in for example, Venerable Atisha, not Venerable Asanga, different person. So Venerable Atisha was invited by the Tibetan royalty to bring Buddhism back into Tibet around I think it's the 10th century or 11th century, when Buddhism had declined somewhat because it was transmitted earlier and people were doing it fairly well, some of them, but a fair number were also misinterpreting the teachings, and they weren't, it was declining. And so the king invited from Nalanda, the greatest monastery in the land, invited the amongst the 500 top scholars at Nalanda, the crown jewel, Venerable Atisha, who was also, according to the commentaries and the stories of his life, wasn't just a scholar, he was an unbelievable yogi and practitioner. Just to give you some perspective on this, a while ago when I was talking about loving kindness and I said this is a really serious thing to do, to generate loving kindness, that's the guy who spent 12 years with Serlingpa, training in equanimity, loving kindness, compassion, bodhicitta, right? So he did huge amounts of practice, in addition to being among the 500 great scholars of Nalanda at the time and being the crown jewel of those scholars. So Venerable Atisha is invited by the Tibetans, and someone, I can't remember who, basically said to Venerable Atisha, said, you're this incredible scholar. The library at Nalanda, when the Muslims invaded, I think, in the 12th century, 13th century, and the Muslim historians of that caliphate, they said it took us 3 months to burn all the books in the library at Nalanda because there were so many books. Anyway, so he was this unbelievable scholar, right? And so the Tibetans said, look, we don't have the time, the knowledge, this and that, to translate all these texts from the great monasteries and to learn them all like you have. So can you compose one text that takes us through the entirety of the Buddha's teachings and makes sense out of all of them and puts them all in an order so that we can practice them in order and achieve the realizations of the path? And he was like, okay. And so he writes this incredible text, and it's short and it's in verse, so you can memorize it if you want, called Lamp for the Path. A lamp for the path. And it's incredible. It's one of the reasons his home monastery didn't call him home. They sent for him to come back and leave the Tibetans alone, and he said, well, I don't really want to do that right now, but here's a text I wrote. And then they said, oh wow, yeah, actually you can stay there, keep writing stuff like this. Anyway, so then the Tibetans, over the course of time, as they became reestablished as great practitioners, great scholars of Buddhism, translated huge amounts of material again from the Sanskrit canon and a number of other canons into Tibetan. They then started producing commentaries on the Lamp for the Path. In the Gelug school, some of those commentaries are called Lamrim, stages of the path. So now you have a lamp for the path to walk along the path with, but it's a skeletal text. It's a verse text that you memorize so that if you already have all the information in your head, you can recall that verse and then gain access to all the information you have sort of stored in your mind related to that part of the path, and you know where it fits. Lamrim is filling in with detail each point so that you have all of the other relevant detail. Well, when we're talking about the 3 types of practitioners, what sutra does this come from? What are the sources? What does it mean? How do you incorporate that into your own practice? Blah, 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 blah. When we're talking about concentration, what are the major sutras on training and concentration? What are the major commentaries through the tradition that talk about training and concentration? Okay, that's going to be the Bhavanakrama, that's going to be the King of Concentration Sutras, blah, 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 right? And then lays it out once again in order. You're laying everything out in order from beginning to end. So this is Lamrim. Brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. It teaches you so that when you see any Buddhist teaching, you go, oh, that's here. On the path, that's over here. It's not over here. It's at this part of the path. And you know where it lives. It's brilliant. It's one of the most incredible, brilliant things that's ever been done in the history of Buddhist thought. Right. So this is another genre, you could say, is this whole genre of stages of the path. How does a normal person like you and me go from being absolutely normal to being a Buddha? What are the steps and stages and meditative realizations? And what are the key texts we can rely upon to get the information about those aspects of training in the path and so on and so forth? So really, really brilliant. So the basic program at FPMT, which they run all the time, and they run from centers all over the world, over and over and over again, and you can do online now because of COVID. They started doing them online. Thank goodness for all of us. They can take you from knowing virtually nothing about Buddhism through the Lamrim tradition, through the mind training tradition, through the ornament of clear realization tradition, through what else is in there? Mind and mental factors. So some of you have asked me questions where you're like, well, what does it mean when this happens and blah, 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 and what are these aspects of your mind and how does cognition work with the eye and blah, blah. Buddhism has like an entire cognitive psychological model for how a human, well, not just human mind, but how minds work in general. And it's entirely geared towards a person who's trying to attain realizations on the path. That's the purpose of it. What types of cognitive instruments do you need to use to attain realizations on the path? And what types of mental factors and main minds are virtuous, non-virtuous, neutral? Which ones can you use for training? Which ones can you not use for training? It's an entire cognitive model. It's extremely sophisticated. So that's in there. You know? And then eventually also, towards the end of the program, they have grounds and paths related to the Bodhisattva path, which is all the steps and stages of the Bodhisattva path as a separate presentation from Ornament of Clear Realization, where you're laying it out in a lot more detail. And then they also have grounds and paths of secret mantra. So people who are interested in Vajrayana, at the end of the program, they have an entire, it's sort of like Lamrim for Tantra. They have an entire way of organizing all the Tantras, which are extremely complicated, and arranging them in an order and explaining them in a way that you can actually understand what each thing is and what it's for and where you use it in your training. Again, it's amongst the most brilliant things ever produced by the human mind. So that's the basic program. Basic. Then they have a master's program where you do it 40 hours a week for like 6 years or something, or 7 years. And then a geshe, a Tibetan geshe, does this same process basically, but it takes 20 years, and they do it 10 hours a day, 6 days a week for 20 years. And then some of the other lineages, they're not as hardcore with the study. They're still quite serious, but they're not as hardcore. Kagyu, Nyingma, Sakya, they all have study also, but they put a lot more practice into the study program than most Gelug programs. But interestingly, because the main lineage holder for the FPMT lineage has a background that includes some other things, even though they're mainly Gelug, they baked practice stuff into the basic program. So there's a whole bunch of practice you do as part of the program also. Brilliant. Totally brilliant. So that's what's on my mind for anyone who was curious, and I don't see any questions coming in, so this is what I do. Yeah, there's a really wonderful translation of one of the commentaries for the Heart Sutra. Uh, that's not a modern commentary. It was written, I think, 13th century something. Ah, thank you, Ty. Appreciate it. So one of the really really interesting things about the Heart Sutra, as everyone's probably heard, form is emptiness, emptiness is form, form is none other than emptiness, emptiness is none other than form. There are three major interpretations of that statement. There are three. I have a preference for one of them, but very, very important statement in the history of Buddhist thought. But not everyone agrees on what it means. But you know what nobody says? Nobody says the stupid stuff you find in modern commentaries on the subject. So word, I don't know all that much about Tantra. Uh, hello, welcome Felix. That being said, if you uh, how to say, Tantra is very complicated and involves very pretty serious commitments. How to say, kind of regardless of where you got it. Like if somebody gave it to you without empowerments and stuff, that's one thing, and without this and without that and without the vows and all that. But if you take all the vows, it's quite serious. And then in Tantra, there are 4 different classes: action, performance, yoga, and highest yoga. And some of them require certain vows, some of them have other vows. Some of them have more serious vows than others, but both of the vows that you would take normally for all of those are quite serious. I don't know how it works on the Hindu side. If you're visualizing yourself as a Hindu deity, I'm not sure how that works. But basically, roughly speaking, the idea with that sort of thing is that what makes it work is you're making your mind way more powerful. Maybe also in a mystical way. Maybe there's an aspect like this, but mainly think about it like this: if you had the ability actually to control what appears in your visual field with such refinement that on purpose, for a particular purpose, only when you wanted to and not out of control, because that's schizophrenia, you could cause an image to appear that was as vivid and real as your own hand right here. Why? Because your hand is basically a mental image of the world. And so with sufficient control, you can overlay other things onto your visual experience because that experience is being generated by your mind. So instead of seeing a hand, you could see a deity's hand. And the deity's hand maybe has, I don't know, maybe their fingers bend in a certain position. And that position represents the 3 jewels. And if you know what those jewels are, then you're seeing your hand as a representation of the jewels. And you don't forget. And maybe because of how it's oriented or because of how the fingers are, it represents compassion, or it represents this, or it represents that. And so when you see your hand, it triggers all of the information related to that subject. Fantastic, you know? So you're training yourself to use the symbolic power of your mind to supercharge the process of transforming your mind and your character. Now, if you start thinking it's all real, then you go crazy. If you start thinking that your hand visualized that way means that you're already really an enlightened being, then you're then you're going nuts. So, yeah, some of it's like this. The other aspect is if you're visualizing an entire environment, it takes a lot of mental power to be able to do that. A lot of training, a lot of mental power. So if you have the mental ability to generate an entire three-dimensional environment with 150 deities in it that are so stable that not even a pupil changes in their eye for a period of 4 hours while you're doing a session of your sadhana, your mind is now extremely refined, and basically whatever else you want to do with it in terms of training and concentration, study, that, analytical meditation, your mind is like an unbelievably powerful, refined instrument now. So it's a very skillful way of working with yourself and making things more and more and more available to you that you've learned through your training. If you don't have training that is informing what all the symbols are and is informing what all of it means and teaching you how to use it the right way, and if you don't already have some realizations from your training from previous things, then it's a bit like having a really expensive car with no engine in it. And not only does it not have an engine, but even if it had some of the symbolism and so forth that would make it work, okay, fine, it has an engine, but where's the gas? What is it that you're using to power the whole thing? Because according to Buddhist thought, you need renunciation, bodhicitta, and an understanding of emptiness. So if you don't even know what those three things are, you have no fuel to put in the car to run the practice. It's just you visualizing stuff in your head, right? So yeah, it can be good if you know what you're doing. It can be really bad if you're not don't know what you're doing. It can be sort of okay if you kind of know what you're doing. And then there are more layers to it, of course, but yeah, in terms of my beginner understanding of it, that's what I would have to say. Yeah, the most important bit is that you study in great detail what all the elements of the thing, what that tantra is, so that you can understand all the symbolic elements. Like, if you're going through a sadhana, do you know what each part of the sadhana is representing in terms of transforming the different elements of your life into the path to enlightenment? Because it's not just seeing a bunch of pictures in your head. Each one of them is related to something that actually happens to you when you're dying and being reborn. And that's what you're training in. You're training in that, right? So if it's just a bunch of pictures in your head, then it's, you know, if you're not very good at it, maybe it's not a bad thing. But if you're really good at making those pictures seem real, you can go nuts. Especially if you don't know what it's for. So this is my beginner's understanding from things I've heard here and there. Okay. Bad dodge. When meditating on consciousness, I find myself not thinking thoughts, but noticing my awareness is moving between sensations, twitches. Okay, so that's not meditating on consciousness. That's a great point. So bad. Uh, yeah, fantastic point. When you're meditating on consciousness, if your mind is floating around between the external senses, right? If your mind is getting pulled out of the central mind's experience and out into the senses here, then it's no longer even focused on the activities of the central mind. So that's not meditating on consciousness. That's you running around between the five external senses out of control. This is why I put meditation on the contents of consciousness and meditation on consciousness at the end of, well, not at the end, but at the near the very end of a long process of training and other stuff, because it's really hard. It's really tough to do. Yeah, and you're absolutely right. That's not the intent of the practice. That's a really astute observation. So, a lot of people, when they do just sitting kind of practice, here's what happens: they sit down and they say, okay, I'm not going to do anything. And then all sorts of stuff happens, and they think, well, because I'm not doing any of that on purpose, my mind's not moving to my eye on purpose. My mind's not moving to the sound on purpose. My mind's not generating that thought on purpose. My mind's not following that thought up and doing this and that with the thought on purpose. Therefore, I'm in a state of non doing. And that's not true. There's no you inside there who's independent of your mind. So if your mind is running around doing a bunch of stuff, then the thing that is supposed to be non doing is doing. Similar to how you meditate on vision, though, for those of you who have done this practice, where you meditate on the entire visual field, which we've done a taste of in this class, similar to that, you can learn to pull back and observe. In the way that I teach it, you don't observe it running to the external senses. That's a fault. That's not the intent of the practice. You observe it generating mental content of various kinds, and you observe the gaps between the content and no content until you become aware of what this is that is generating the content. And then, as best you can, you hold your awareness on consciousness, whatever qualities of consciousness appear there, of which there are very few to sort of latch onto. The only one I think that you can latch onto is the fact that it's formless. Okay. Well, word. What is the deity? What is the deity? This is what I mean. You have to, if you do those practices, you have to study a lot. What do they mean? The deity. What is the deity? What is it that is manifesting everything else? Is it your visualized Ganesh or your visualized whatever? Is that what's generating everything else? No, because that's a manifestation of your mind. Your mind, and not your human mind, but your subtle mind, which none of us have access to at the moment. That's the thing generating everything else. That's the deity. Okay. Sugar-free meditation is very interesting. Good. 108, importance of a skillful guide. Definitely. Sometimes visions occur. Yeah, this is another thing one of my teachers used to say. He said, if you meditation training means, to boil it down, that your mind finally, for the first time ever, starts doing what you intended to do. The mind intends to visualize itself as a deity. And then instead of doing that, it fantasizes about all sorts of things appearing. And it goes, ooh, that's interesting. And it chases that and loses the visualization of the body as a deity. And then it's no longer in a process of meditation. You know? So whatever you intended to do, that's meditation. Whatever you intended to do with the practice, that's meditation. Stuff that comes up where you end up chasing it is not practice. On rare occasion, it can be the results of practice, but it's really important that you have a teacher, a mentor, something, which is not going to be me for this thing that you're doing, obviously, right? But you need to have a teacher, mentor you can go to and say, okay, so I was doing my practice and this happened. Is that something that should happen that I need to focus on, or is that something that I shouldn't worry about and just carry on doing the main sadhana? Oh, okay. And bad, yeah, you're welcome. It's really like the way that I teach these in the order that I teach these. First, you're just learning how to get your mind to do a little bit of what you wanted it to do. That's the first aspect. The second aspect is making the mind extremely calm, and like 14 other things I'm not telling you, because if I explain it all, then again, it just takes longer. So we do body scanning meditation. And I've talked at length about the benefits of this, and there are a million benefits, and it'll make you better at all sorts of other things you might want to do later if you do it the way that I teach it. But it's not important really for you to know all that. The main thing is it makes your mind extremely calm. Next, your mind's going to get dull. So we do Mahamudra on the external senses, which makes the mind less dull. And you can take that practice into your life and do it 10 hours a day. So since you now have a practice you can do 10 hours a day, your concentration is going to get better. You're not going to be stirring your mind up as much. And you've already practiced the quality of mind that you need to try to meditate on consciousness, which is a mind that is not getting involved in the contents of consciousness. It has pulled back and is basically observing an entire field of consciousness instead of an object inside the field. Okay, good. Now, once you've done that with all five senses, you can grab the bandwidth of the attention from those senses and start pulling it inside towards the mind. The easiest aspect of mental stuff to grab onto, because the mind is formless, colorless, has no smell, has no shape, has no weight, has no tactile sensation, etc. There's nothing to grab onto whatsoever in terms of what the mind is that is easy to grab onto. Since it's like that, look at mental content, which is not you jumping to your eyeballs and seeing stuff. That's visual content. It's not you jumping to your ears when you hear something. That's auditory content. Now, mentally, if you visualized by accident, right, if it just came up, if you visualized the Buddha for a second and you sort of saw that as mental content, that's mental content. If you heard the Buddha, or not heard the Buddha, but if you mentally said, oh, that's interesting, as we talk to ourselves in our own heads, that's mental content. So that's not something you're hearing with your ear. That is a mentally generated sound, right? So whatever happens to appear there, you just observe that pulling back in the same way that you pulled back to see the entire visual field. And you've already practiced how to pull your awareness back and do less, right? Eventually, you start seeing gaps. So there are gaps where there's content, content, content in front of the mind, and then there's a gap. And those gaps get longer and longer. And then suddenly, without really trying, because the mind knows that's what it does, it experiences that's what it does, it's aware that's what it does. So eventually, when there's nothing appearing in front of it and it's not falling asleep, it becomes aware of its own qualities because that's what's there for it to be aware of. And then when that happens, you can meditate using whatever has appeared there in terms of actual mental, in terms of your mind, right? Yeah, not mental content, but actual qualities of the mind itself. And you can meditate on those qualities that have appeared in your experience. So, in brief, this is how I teach it. Because otherwise, I honestly and truly, I don't know how a person living in the world would. I don't know how a person living in the world would do those practices and be successful in them. Especially not with the types of techniques that are taught more generally, which is sort of like just sit down and observe your thoughts. Okay, good luck. You know, just sit down and don't do much. Oh, good luck. Yeah, just sit down and follow your breath until your mind calms down. By the way, it's your mind is gonna get really dull as soon as it gets a little bit calm, but we're not going to tell you that. And you'll spend years with your mind getting more dull, not knowing what's going on. And we're not going to tell you that. But just keep going. Eventually it'll happen. No, it won't. It won't just eventually happen. So, I think that falls into laxity, falls into mental dullness. In the Buddhist corpus, you could call it sort of blanking out. But what we consider that to be is this: you were meditating on an object. You had selected some object of concentration, right? And then once the mind calms down a bit, the mind is maintaining some concentration brightly and lucidly here on the object. And then the attention goes, ooh, look how calm the mind is. And the attention starts to brighten up, looking at how the mind is calm, and it starts losing the lucid, bright, fresh awareness of the object. And then as you do this more and more, eventually you might even lose the object, and you're focused entirely on the fact that the mind has very little stuff coming up in it. And when you do that, it becomes dull and lax and less capable. Your memory gets worse. You get stupider. The texts literally say you will get stupider if you do this. So this is not a form of training. It has no benefit. So how do you prevent it? Well, you can get really good at refreshing the mind and keep the same object, which is really, really hard to do. I spent years trying to do it that way. Or you can do Mahamudra style practice, where the external sense gates become the object of concentration. You know, one thing you're going to have a lot of trouble doing if you're doing that kind of meditation, having the mind distract inwardly and observe mental content. or not observe mental content, but observe the calmness of the mind and get distracted by that and pull away from the object of concentration. Really hard to do that when the object of concentration is all five of your external senses simultaneously, brightly, intensely open and non reactive to what's occurring. Really tough to get the dull mind like that. And then the next problem you'll have is that there are subtle movements of the mind, and there's a subtle type of dullness that is a bit difficult to talk about. But now you need to, how to say, now you need to learn how to observe these subtle movements of your mind, subtle changes in your mind. So what would be really helpful? Meditating on consciousness itself. Right? So notice how the problems you have in meditation align with the techniques that I'm teaching in a certain order. That's interesting. In the beginning, you can't get your mind focused. Let's do something that makes it focused. Okay. And then you can't make it calm and focused. Okay, let's make it calm and focused. And then you make it, then it's calm and focused, but it's dull. Okay, well, let's make it calm, focused, and bright and lucid. Now it's bright and lucid, calm and focused, but it has subtle problems in the quality of the concentration that you now have. Okay, fine. Let's meditate on consciousness where those subtle problems are so you can see them more clearly. So I'm teaching them in this order because that's the order that the problems are, and I'm giving you the antidotes without telling you. The antidotes for each problem are already there, baked into the practice. For those of you who are wondering why I put things in this order. I mean, if you're staying with the same object, you can come out of the meditation and take a short walk and look at the sky. You can visualize really bright white light. You can do this thing where you straighten your posture up, almost like when you're driving and you're falling asleep and you go, right? And you just sort of brute force straighten your body up, refresh your mind, and try to make it more awake. There's all sorts of stuff you can do, not changing the object. But why? It's really hard to do it that way. Why not do it in a way that isn't so hard to do? Okay. How much does the moral conduct of a teacher affect the validity of a given lineage he or she passes, if at all? Tremendously. Great question. Tremendously. Ethics is the foundation of everything else. So it is possible for certain yogis who have extremely high accomplishment, whose minds are basically non-abiding nirvana on the higher levels of the bodhisattva path, to do things that appear extremely unethical but are not unethical. How many of those people are walking around? Very, very, very few. Probably you've never met one. So, in a sense, you don't even have to worry about whether or not the person in front of you is a being like that. You can just assume that they're not at the level of non-abiding nirvana in terms of their practice. And if they're doing unethical stuff, it's because they don't have very much capability. Or they may have a fair amount of capability in meditation, for example, but guess what? Meditation doesn't fix your delusions. It doesn't fix your negative mental states. It just temporarily suppresses them. So even a person who could sit there convincingly for 8 hours engaged in concentration can come out of that concentration and then sleep with one of their students or steal money or other unethical things. So this is what confuses people a huge amount. You know, it's until you've attained the degree of arhatship, until you've attained nirvana or non-abiding nirvana, you have every negative emotion that exists as a human being. You have all of the negative emotions, which means you can do all of the negative actions. And if you can't control yourself enough outside of sitting in a state of meditation to do, if you can't control yourself enough, let me repeat, sorry. If you can't control yourself enough outside of a meditative session to not abuse people, there's something wrong with your transmission of the lineage. Doesn't mean the lineage is wrong. Maybe that lineage as a whole with other teachers and so forth is perfectly fine, but there's something wrong with your transmission of it because you haven't made enough progress as a person to not do really stupid, unethical, harmful things to other people. So clearly, your understanding and capability isn't well developed enough that you should be doing what you're doing in terms of teaching, right? That's a bit more complicated, and we should do some practice. So we'll start very soon. For those who are waiting for that, we'll start at 9:30 tonight because there's a lot of questions and they're good questions. So let's say that there was a really controversial teacher in a lineage, and people trained with that teacher, and then some of the students of that teacher are now teaching. Very common. Quite often what happens is those people who are teaching don't just stop with that teacher's instructions. They go a certain distance with those instructions, and then bad things happen because of this and that with that teacher. And then they go and they train with other people, and they carry on down the path. They go, oh yeah, well, I don't really want to say anything bad about my teacher because I made some progress with that person. And then, but now since then I've trained with other people also. I've trained with these people over here and those people and blah 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 blah. Now, if it was me and I was advising someone who was new, I would say probably don't go with that stream. Probably in general, don't go with that stream because who knows? You know? Not even that it's bad, but somebody else, like let's say that person trained with Kagyu Lama so and so, Kempo Sodarge so and so, because their teacher turned out to be really unethical. Go train with him. Go train with the guy they went and trained with, or one of his students. If you want to learn that stuff, go to a source where it doesn't have this problem in the lineage. You know, there are hundreds and thousands of people teaching every stream of Buddhism, generally speaking. Go train with a lineage that doesn't have the risk and the problem in it. Maybe incomplete, maybe broken, maybe problematic. Not that it is, but just go to one where it's a little safer, especially if you're new. If you've been around a while and you want to give it a shot, it's up to you. No problem. Okay. If consciousness is something known, who or what knows it? So, Gongsho, awareness, so knowingness, according to the great texts, can't be directly known. You can't know knowing because that's sort of like the edge of a knife trying to cut itself, right? That you can't flip the edge of the knife around to cut the knife that has the edge, right? So, like this, knowingness, the quality of knowingness in your mind can't know its own knowingness. However, your mind's knowing faculty or knowing quality can know basically every other quality of consciousness. So consciousness, the knowing aspect of consciousness, can be pointed at any other aspect of consciousness that exists, is my understanding. So yeah, of course, I think I tend to agree with the classics that the knowing aspect of mind can't turn around to look at itself. It can be known as what it is because you see it by way of analogy, sort of like a lamp or a flashlight. You see the light shining on an object and you go, oh, there's something generating this light to illuminate the object. And by implication, you know that the light source is there, even though you can't turn the light source around to point at the light source, right? You can't turn the flashlight around to light up the flashlight. But you know that the light source is there because it's lighting up the objects in front of it. So, like this, knowingness itself can't be directly known by knowingness, but the other qualities of mind which is where the flashlight analogy breaks down, but the other qualities of mind can be observed by the knowing faculty of mind. So that's the position I take, and that's my experience in meditation. If you continue to pull the mind back, pull the mind back, pull the mind back, you eventually start seeing the qualities of consciousness. You begin to start seeing what consciousness is. You don't see the knowingness aspect because that's the thing doing the looking, so to speak, but you can point that looking at the other qualities of the awareness. Based on what you've said, I think I have been missing some body scanning, intensive breath. Bad dodge. Yeah, so here's the thing. Probably you would benefit, as many people would, from having a practice like intensive breath where you can cut a huge amount of conceptual thoughts before you try to do something with the mind. And then body scanning to make the mind even more calm while it's relatively focused. And then meditating on the external five senses so that your mind, as you said, is getting pulled out to the external five senses, which is not resting on consciousness. So you need some training to not get pulled out to the senses, which is the first part of the Mahamudra process. And then you pull it inside, and you don't just try to look at consciousness, which is really, really, really hard to do. You look at mental content first. And then when you see gaps, you don't do anything in particular. You just remain in a non doing, highly awake, highly stable, non doing condition. And the mind, because it knows that's what it does, begins to be aware of its own qualities. As long as it's not getting pulled out to the senses, and as long as it's not getting pulled into and distracted by mental content appearing. So, like this. How long does that take? Oh, I mean, people that have been training with me, some of them to get to the level of being able to meditate on consciousness took them 3 years, 4 years. Which is also why, for people who are doing my stuff, I say, you can learn my stuff probably in 8 months. And then you will have done probably as far as I can take you with these practices in 4 or 5 years. You'll probably need to do a little bit of retreat, maybe 3 to 5 days, to initially access each of the levels of practice at a level where it's kind of stable and you know what it is. So yeah, this is, roughly speaking, is how I teach these techniques, the foundations, what I call the foundations.
Okay, my friends. Oh, gosh, didn't realize that was you. Yeah, so sorry, let me fix my mic before I explode everyone's head. There we go. All right. So, should get into the practice now. Word. Yes, you can use virtually anything as an objective support, as long as it's not something really bad, you know? You can use virtually anything as an external support to begin training the mind in concentration and to begin inducing a state of concentration. And there are benefits to using some things rather than others. Some of them help more than other things, but you can use all sorts of things as supports to the practice. But then there's a question of, is what you're doing part of a sort of a logical flow of moving from having very little capability to some theoretical end point, let's say? Is it a path, or is it just a curiosity, or is it a little tributary off the main river where there's interesting things you can do there, but then you need to go back and keep walking along the main path until you get to the results that everyone says you can gain, you know? Okay. Right. I think that's most of the question. Yeah, so in terms of body scanning and intensive breath, again, it's a process, right? You need to gain the skills of being able to place your mind where you want, hold it there for a bit, pool the mind in one place. That's intensive breath. You need to be able to pull the mind in rapidly when you want to pull it in. That's also intensive breath. Next, body scanning to make the mind extremely calm, to get rid of huge amounts of mental content that doesn't need to be there. Body scanning. Then you need to start discovering what you are as a being while also fixing the next set of problems that you have training and concentration. So that's meditating on the five external senses. You're going to learn what your senses are, what your minds are from direct experience. The five things that allow you to experience absolutely everything else in the world. Then the only thing left is consciousness. And once the five external senses are more tame, you can grab the bandwidth and start to pull it into the main mind and observe mental content much more easily, much more stable than if these are running around and you're trying to observe mental content at the same time. It's chaos, right? But if these are stable and you've able to pull in some of the bandwidth, now you can just kind of watch mental content and there's not as much pressure pulling the mind out into the senses. So it's a flow chart of skills, and you move along at the pace that you actually have the skills. If you don't have the skill to do this one, then do this one. If you don't have the skill to do this one, do that one. And that will change day by day because we live in the real world. Some days, because of whatever reason, you'll be able to go through this to consciousness very easily after 3 or 4 years of practice in the techniques, at least the way that I teach them. Some days intensive breath will be difficult. And you'll need to do like 3 sessions of intensive breath before you can do anything else because your cat just got hit by a car or you just got a raise at work. So your mind is too distracted because things are great or it's too distracted because things are terrible. And you can't get your mind to even pull in to do the basic practice. So you have to just railroad your mind basically until your mind is doing what it should be doing. And then once it's doing what it should be doing, some body scanning to make it calm. And then, right? So now you have a toolkit after 3 or 4 years of practice. You have a toolkit you can use to deal with whatever's actually coming up in real life when you're training. And then there's rumination, right? Which I've said before. What are you ruminating on? What are you using that skill to develop? Hopefully, somewhere along the way, you're getting into a lineage and the topics for rumination, like loving kindness and Lumrim topics like we were talking about earlier today, uh, and all these subjects from mind training and blah, blah, blah. All of that is stuff you would be ruminating on. What are you attacking with those ruminations? Well, you're attacking whatever your big problem actually is. So if you're an arrogant prick, then then you attack arrogance and you become humble. If you're like unbelievably lusty and you're chasing everything that moves, and this is causing huge problems for you, ruining your relationships, this and that, then you attack lust. If you're unbelievably angry, you cultivate patience and loving kindness. You do ruminations that attack the problems you actually have as you're living your life in the real world. Right? So this is where the rumination piece comes in. Because if your life is less chaotic because you have more good qualities in real life, if your life becomes easier, then when you go to do your practice over here, you're not dealing with the fact that, you know what, I said that really dumb thing in the group chat at work, and now I have to deal with the fallout of this for 3 weeks. Oh, right? Because you didn't get angry, you didn't lose your patience, you didn't become frustrated, you didn't say the stupid thing. And instead, you waited a bit and you said something helpful and insightful that diffused tensions. And now the timeline for you dealing with the negative emotions of a difficult situation at work goes from 3 weeks because you made a big problem, you made a small problem into a big problem, goes from 3 weeks down to like 2 days. Fantastic. Do you understand what I mean? So this is where rumination fits in. It's you overcoming your actual problems in real life by changing what qualities you have in your mind, and therefore the quality of your sessions from day to day, year by year, will be higher than someone who doesn't have control of their character. Okay, right. Let's do a bit of practice. Sorry that we talked so long. Hopefully this has been beneficial, but we'll do some practice now, maybe 15, 20 minutes for those who are still willing and able. Tantra is a bit different because you can you can take the energy of that, remove the object, refine it, store it, use it for something else. So you can direct it in a different way. But again, this is an extremely advanced practice. Most people that think they're doing that sort of thing are just running around becoming an even angrier, even more unmanageable, even more rude, even more inconsiderate prick than they were before, which is not helping them at all. Certainly not helping other people. So those again, misunderstanding those practices is a big problem. Okay, let's do some practice. All right. So yesterday we did some meditation on, I believe it was the visual sense, if I'm not mistaken, and then we did consciousness. Or maybe we went straight from tactile to consciousness, I can't remember. So what we should probably do today, because almost everyone reached out and then said, "Oh, I couldn't do it." You know, I tried. I tried to do this meditation on consciousness thing and I couldn't do it. This is a good experience because you know that if you were to try to do this practice, if you were to try to get your mind to simply observe itself, or even just to observe the contents of consciousness, it ends up running around and doing a bunch of stuff that isn't the practice, even when you have prepared it as best you can by, I mean, we did, I believe, some intensive breath, and then we did some body scanning. So we did our best to prepare the mind, still didn't work, right? So this shows you hopefully that to do that kind of practice, you need a lot of preparation. To do it really well and to have it work, you need preparation. So this is why we'll go back and do the basic, so-called basic, the foundational, the the things that allow you to do everything else. So let's just start with intensive breath, and then we'll do a bit of body scanning and then move into 5 points. And today we'll go from seated practice into standing practice. I'm sorry, from seated practice into walking practice. So hopefully you're somewhere you can walk. If not, then just do seated 5 points when we get to that part. Okay. All right. So just start by placing the mind on the breath. Those of you who've been here a while, you already know what to do. If you're relatively new, just try to place your mind onto the breath with great force. Your distractions have great force. You need to meet them with great force since you've been stirring your mind up all day long. You haven't been in retreat for 3 days where you can just let your mind settle down on its own. You've got to use some forceful intent, according to the classics. So use great force. Bring the mind to the sensations of the breath, not the imagined breath, not the analyzed breath, etc., but the actual tactile sensations of breathing that you feel inside one of your nostrils or near one of your nostrils. Okay, 3, 2, 1, begin. Okay, bring your awareness now to your feet. And when I say place the awareness in the feet, I mean do not visualize, don't imagine, don't analyze, don't label things with words, don't describe them in your head. Pool your awareness, take the bandwidth of your awareness from the entire rest of your body, from your other senses, from your mental activity, and place all of that bandwidth as best you can into feeling the actual physical sensations that are there in the feet without imagining what the feet look like or the shape they are. The tactile experience has no color or shape in a visual sense. So feel what you actually feel there without imagining anything or visualizing anything. So place the mind in the feet, ankles, calves, knees, lower thigh, the upper thighs, into the joint of the hips, the front of the pelvis, back of the pelvis, tailbone, anus, perineum, sexual organs, now the waist belt, which is a ring of tissue about 3 or 4 inches wide surrounding the lower part of the torso. So just above the hips, the next 3 or 4 inches of your body, all the way around. Now the diaphragm belt. This is the area that your diaphragm moves and that you feel the diaphragm moving. It's the next 3 or 4 inches above the waist from the solar plexus down to the top of the waist, all the way around the body. Now the chest, everything from the nape of the neck, the small of the neck, to the solar plexus, not including the collarbones, not including the shoulder blades. I consider those to be part of your shoulders. Just the barrel of the chest, all the way around. Now, both of your shoulders, including the collarbones and the shoulder blades in the back. Both of the bicep areas, elbows, forearms, wrists, palms, and the back of your hands, fingers, the lower third of your neck, middle third of your neck, upper third of your neck, the sake of time, just do the joint between the neck and the skull, and then the entirety of the skull except for the top. Now the top of the skull, you may feel that some portion of the top of the skull has more sensations or more ability to feel what's happening there, or that it tingles, or that there's movement. Place your mind there. If you don't feel anything and it all feels the same, just place it on the back third in the middle. Without losing that point, stretch your awareness down to your hands. so that you have an awareness of the top of the head and both hands. And stretch your awareness again from the top of the head down to both feet, so that you're aware of the top of the head, both hands, both feet. We'll come to a standing position. And as you transition, don't lose the awareness of the 5 points. And just stand for a minute, aware of the 5 points. Now, for walking, only walk as fast as you can while keeping the 5 points. If you find that you're losing the 5 points, stop, reestablish the 5 points, and then begin again. So only walk as fast as you can actually hold them in place. You might see me walking a little faster, but I've been doing this for a couple of weeks, believe it or not. So if you need to walk at this speed that I'm demonstrating on the screen, that's fine. If this is as fast as you can go without losing the 5 points and keeping the concentration's quality really, really high, then do it like this. For those of you who can do that, put maybe 10%, 20% of your bandwidth into your eyes, not looking at anything in particular, really, just you'll fall over if you can't see anything. So don't pull all the bandwidth out of the eyes. And then just maintain the 5 points as you walk. You can walk back and forth, you can walk in a circle. It's up to you. Okay. 5 points is the first meditative technique that I teach that you can take off your cushion and into other things. Don't do it while you're driving. Don't do it while operating heavy machinery. Don't do it while crossing the road. Focus on what you're doing if you're doing something dangerous. But the rest of the time, you can do something like 5 points meditation. And once you get good at it, it doesn't look like you're doing anything. You can have part of your mind engaged in this kind of practice quite regularly. And this forms a bridge, is a transition between. That's good, purple. It's very, very good. So this practice operates as a transition between practices where you're placing the mind on a specific object and practices where you're going to be taking the entirety of one field of awareness as the object of meditation. So the next step in this practice after 5 points is meditating on the six directions within the tactile sphere, which is a bit more difficult, uh, takes a bit more skill, and the quality of your concentration is very different than holding it on even five aspects of your body because you're just asking the awareness to pervade what's there in the entire field. It's very different and more difficult than the practice we did today. So likewise, you can take that practice out into more and more circumstances, which is the point of Mahamudra style practices. Uh, yeah, so purple. In terms of noticing what your mind is like, that is one of the quintessential experiences of training and concentration. You should notice through training and concentration what your mind is normally like. And it will seem like in the beginning, it'll seem like whatever problems you have mentally, even if you didn't have OCD, it'll seem like your mental problems are much worse than normal. And the reason it seems like they're worse than normal is because your ability to see them has become more. And after the ability to see them becomes more, then you can start making them less. But there's an awkward there's like teenage years, you know, where you have the body of an adult but the mind of a kid. You have the ability now to see what some of the problems are, but you don't have the ability to fix them yet. And that's where a lot of people quit. Hans, am I early? Did the time change? No, we've been at this for an hour, Hans. Hour and a half. Okay. Can we do six directions now? Remind me tomorrow. We could do it tomorrow. Lang, that's a good question. I would say there's some wiggle room there, but if you notice that for some period of time, your attention sort of snaps back. This is what happens a lot of times. Your attention sort of snaps back into the hand because it left. And then you go, oh, I was supposed to have it in the hand. Just stop for a minute, reestablish the points, crown of the head, down to the hands, crown of the head, down to the feet, 5 points, and then go again with an even firmer intent to not lose any of the 5 points like that. Because very often you'll feel, oh, I just feel it sort of refills the part of the body it was supposed to be in to begin with, which means it was out, and I don't know how long it was out. So stop for a moment, reset the excuse me, reset the attention, reset the intention. Also, I'm going to do this. I'm not going to let my mind move out of these points. and then carry on. Because otherwise, it can be very easy to sort of do it half. You know what I mean? Where your mind's running around, and sometimes it's in, sometimes it's out, and you're not really developing a skill. You're just going for endurance. A lot of people do this, by the way. I hope this really helps to say. A lot of people try to go for endurance in their meditation practice before they have any quality in the practice. It's so much better, even according to the classics, even according to the great meditators of the tradition that I follow. They say, look, when you start doing a long retreat, where you're going to be in retreat for a year, do 5-minute sessions. Do 16 5-minute sessions a day with great intensity and great force until the quality is there. When the quality starts to be there, extend the length of the session with quality, only with quality, not quantity. Think about that. Even for great yogis going into a cave somewhere to meditate for a year or 2 years, you know, this is the advice that they give. So likewise, don't it's not about endurance. If you focus on the quality and getting the mental capabilities that you're trying to gain with each skill and really focusing on doing that as correctly as you can for some period, then tomorrow you'll be able to do it correctly a little more. But if you practice it, and I don't know if anyone's trained in music, but they talk about this a lot. If you practice something and you make a mistake at a certain passage every time, the finger was supposed to be here, but it's here, and you make that mistake over and over and over again, but you think, you know what? I'm just going to keep practicing and practicing and practicing, and I'm going to get 5 hours in, no matter what. When you go to play that in front of people, you're going to make that mistake that you're practicing over and over again. It would be so much better to do 20 minutes and to really spend time working on where that finger is so that it ends up in the right place on the instrument and do that like 2 or 3 times perfectly, because the quality is so much more important than the quantity of practice. Yeah. Yeah. It's very much like physical conditioning. It's like training in any other skill. It is a skill until you point that skill at consciousness and various types of consciousness. It's just a skill. You're gaining a bunch of cognitive skills. Once you have those skills, you can point them at, with Mahamudra, for example, you can point them at the things actually making you up as a being. Yeah, that's the other thing, Lang. I'm really, really glad you said that because people need to hear more of this, right? A lot of people try to do 2 hours out of the gate, an hour out of the gate, 45 minutes out of the gate, and they're really determined, or whatever, they're going to do 5 30-minute sessions a day starting on day one. Okay. Some people, maybe that's okay, maybe, but it for a lot of people, if what you're practicing is the equivalent of you're trying to play the guitar, but every time you get to this chord, your pinky can't quite reach the string, and you never quite get the attack on the string the right way, and then when you play it, it's buzzy and it doesn't produce the note, and you do that over and over, and you do that for 2.5 hours a day, you never get better at playing that chord. The chord stays wrong. Right? You're just practicing being wrong over and over again. Which doesn't help that much. It gives you more character, right? Because you're enduring difficulty and failure and all this. It gives you character that you need to be successful eventually, but it's not actually training you in guitar. It's training you in good character. And this is another thing people don't understand about these systems is sometimes they give you stuff that's way above your level and harder to do because you're not going to be able to do it, and you'll spend years not being able to do it if you have determination, and you'll gain good character and good qualities because you're trying to do something you can't do. And eventually, hopefully, you'll kind of make your way around and collect all the stuff you need and you'll do it properly. Personally, I would rather train people in good character when they're training in good character and train people in meditation when I'm training them in meditation. And to train in meditation, 5 minutes Ask people who have done. If anybody in the chat who's been around for a bit will very briefly share your experience of doing Foundation One. There are a huge number of people in the community now who say, "I've been meditating for years. I've been meditating 10 years. I've been meditating 3 years. I've been meditating 7 years." And in 10 days or 5 days of intensive breath meditation, I've made more progress in my meditation and have higher quality sessions than I've had my entire meditative career. Why? Because you're working on the problem that is the first problem. So it doesn't matter that it's 5 minutes. What matters is you're doing 5 minutes actually attacking the first problem you have in meditation for the first time. You see what I mean? And when you do that and you're just building that first skill with a great deal of quality, just quality, then you gain that skill in a short period of time instead of over the course of 20 years of screwing around. So this is my what my humble effort is all about. Yeah, I know. This is what's so incredible. 5 minutes for the initial practice is all you need. And as a matter of fact, because of the intensity of it, because you're literally bringing every cell of your being, every ounce of your forceful intent, every bit of heart you can muster for 5 minutes. My initial teacher, for those of you who haven't heard me say this before, the teacher that taught me this technique, who was a greatly accomplished Zen practitioner, for those who are into Zen, 30 years of Zen practice, and also was a greatly accomplished Tibetan yogi. So he trained in Tibetan practices on top of his Zen practice for another 15 or 20 years. So greatly accomplished, recognized in two lineages. He taught me a 5 minute practice. And he said, if you're not tired after doing this, you're not doing it right. If you start sweating because of the intensity of the effort and the force of the effort you're putting in, that's a good sign. Because you're struggling with, as the texts sometimes say, a drunken wild elephant that's trying to escape a harness you've put around its neck. It is thrashing for its life wildly all over the place to try to get away. You know, for some of you, this will be really traumatic to see, but when you look at the classical diagrams for training and meditation from Buddhism and Taoism, what you find is that it's a the analogies that are used most often are taming a wild elephant, or taming an ox, or taming a wild horse. What happens when you first try to tame that wild animal? You put something around its neck and it thrashes for its life. Absolutely thrashes life or death to get away from being captured. And then you have to take, this is really horrific. They still do this, by the way, when they're taming elephants in particular. You take a stick that has a hook on it like this, that's really sharp, and you put it somewhere sensitive on the animal so that if they thrash too much, it hurts and they eventually have to calm down, right? And it's really horrific to watch. It's really terrible to watch. You see the same thing sometimes with Caesar Milan when Caesar Milan is working with dogs. Anyways, so that's what your mind is like in the beginning. Your mind is basically fighting with every ounce of its power to do what it has always done, which is be totally insane and out of control. And you have to meet it with unbelievable force for 5 minutes. And if you do that, then your ability to generate force to stop the mind's distractions becomes really powerful, really quick. It doesn't take years, it takes days, maybe weeks. And then you can start doing another technique where you're starting to make the concentration much deeper by using a technique that calms the whole system down, body scanning, if you do it right. So it's using the right techniques at the right time and keeping the quality as high as possible for that type of antidote to the meditation problem you're having, keeping the quality of that antidote as high as possible while you're doing that, while you're working on that part. It's not about doing hours a day. Now, if you could do both, fantastic. You know, if you could do both, okay, fine. Do 4 5-minute sessions, right? Don't sit for 10 minutes to do intensive breath. Do a 5 minutes, 5 minute break, 5 minutes, 5 minute break, 5 minutes, 5 minute break, or 3 minute break, or whatever. Take a break, let your mind rest because it should be tired from the effort of the first attempt. And you'll see by session 3 or 4, your mind is like ready to be pointed where you want to point it. Anyways, yeah, quality over quantity, quantity over endurance. And I promise you, I'll put a guarantee stamp on it. If you get good at body scanning, you will be able to sit for an hour within a relatively short period of time if you want to. Body scanning makes the body more comfortable, which is one of the main obstacles that stops people from sitting for a longer period of time. You know, as long as your body is not super injured or dysfunctional, body scanning will allow you to sit naturally, will allow you to start sitting for longer periods of time. So this is also why I put it second in the process for people who are wondering. You can do lots of body scanning once you get to body scanning, as long as the mind isn't getting dull, which, by the way, is why my body scans go up the body to here, because it helps the mind not get dull. By the way, also, this is why I teach body scanning mainly in a standing position, because very difficult for the mind to get too dull standing up. If the body's standing, it stays more fresh. The mind stays more fresh. See? So I'm baking in as many antidotes as I can to the practices we're doing while preparing you for the next thing throughout the process. So this is why I teach in this order. Okay. Uh, conditioning. Yeah. So the intensity will come from thinking about the consequences of not doing your practice, and will come from thinking about the benefits of doing the practice. So there's a rumination meditation that I provide from time to time that's about the personal, the interpersonal, and the spiritual or religious aspect of your motivation for training and meditation. And if you think about these 3 points again and again and again, especially right before you do a session, then you can the to use modern language, the why, the question of why, if it's answered in a powerful way, creates powerful motivation, powerful intent. Isn't that true? Like if, for example, let's use something that's easy to understand. Hopefully, this won't offend anyone, right? But imagine you have a close friend who's sitting next to you. Okay. Now, if somebody looked at your friend a little bit funny, maybe if you stood up and punched that person in the face, that's a really dramatic overreaction to the situation, right? Because the why was quite small. Well, they just looked at him funny, right? So that the why doesn't match the response. So most of us, if somebody looks a little bit funny at a friend of ours, you know, sometimes we just chip in. So we're like, yeah, man, I know my friend's a little funny. Anyways, but then maybe somebody insults your friend. Okay. Now, if you stood up and you punched him in the face, for some people that would be a totally legitimate thing to do. This is not very Buddhist example, but again, the why has become a little more powerful, right? So now the response for some people, they would say, oh well, this is justified now because the why is a little bit more powerful. Now imagine someone punched your friend in the face, right? You're out at a bar, you turn to the side, and someone's punching your friend in the face all of a sudden, and you move to stop that person from punching them in the face by also punching that person, right? Because you didn't know what else to do. Now the why is quite powerful, and the action that's coming out of it also quite powerful, right? So for most of us, the why of someone looking at somebody funny wouldn't be enough to motivate us to do violence. The why of somebody insulting somebody for most of us wouldn't be enough for us to do violence. But seeing someone we really care about having violence done to them, that why is powerful enough, even if we're Buddhists, probably for most of us, that we would do something. We would push that person or whatever to stop them from doing the violence, right? So as the why becomes more powerful, the intent, the force, the amount of yourself that you can put into the activity becomes more. Just going to just going to quiet that down for a minute. I'm not sure what that is. Okay, so in terms of the why for your meditation practice, to make that intent as powerful and forceful as possible, you have to have a similarly powerful why. Why am I doing this? If you want to be able to bring more of yourself to the action so that the intent is really powerful, the why or the reason has to be very strong, very powerful. So, three things that motivate us in general sense, right, is what we get for ourselves, or what we get for other people that we care about. Right? That's fair, isn't it? Those two things we care about. If it helps us or helps our kids or our mother or our father or our best friend, we care. Right? So that's two. The third one is if it's spiritually or religiously important, because we think, well, this has meaning in a huge context that I think is really important, right? So that can motivate us to do things and to do them full on. Right? Okay. So if you contemplate personal reasons, interpersonal reasons, religious slash spiritual reasons for you to bring full force of intention to 5 minutes of intensive breath meditation, then the force of your mind will become more. So let's talk about the personal aspect. Yeah, Oates, you weren't paying attention. I can't think of a good movie for this part. Some parts there are good films for certain things that sort of stick in your head somehow. But so just in terms of the contemplation, right? Think about it like this. Isn't it true that when you get angry, sometimes you miss out on opportunities that you wanted for yourself, or you ruin things that you would have rather not be ruined, or you destroy things you'd rather not have been destroyed? You do things or say things you would have rather not done or said? Isn't this true with anger? With really strong lust, isn't it the same? With really strong arrogance, isn't it the same? With really strong jealousy or envy, isn't it the same? So if our mind is out of control and these things are in the driver's seat, we get less, you personally get less of what you want for you. Secondly, isn't it true that if you have a lot of arrogance, you end up hurting people that you'd rather not hurt, like your wife, your kids, your mother, your father, your mentors, your teachers, your good friends, that your arrogance, your pride sometimes hurts those relationships. Isn't that true? And your anger sometimes ruins those relationships forever. Your lust, if it's pointed in the wrong direction, sometimes ruins those relationships forever. Isn't that true? At your work, likewise, interpersonal. At your work, isn't it true that sometimes your pride, your arrogance, your anger, your envy cause you to miss at your frustration, your weakness of will, where you don't have what it takes to do what you should do at your work, causes you to miss opportunities or ruin opportunities that you'd rather not have missed and rather not have ruined? Isn't that true? Of course it's true. So if your mind was under control, all of these interpersonal things, interpersonal relationships, interpersonal related stuff, where you would benefit the people at your work, you'd benefit the people at home, you'd benefit your friends. And instead, you're harming them, causing them less benefit, you're less productive, and that feeds back on number one. You don't have as close relationships with all these people because your mind is out of control. You don't get as much done because your mind is out of control, which means these people don't get the benefit. Your colleagues at work, your friends, your family, the ones you really care about. Likewise, finally, religiously, isn't it true that all of the great religions that teach meditative stuff say you need this meditative mind to make to make ultimate progress down the spiritual path? Isn't that true? So if you want the highest realizations, if you want to know if rebirth is real or not, if you want to know if karma is real or not, if you want to know if all the funny things we were talking about in terms of what meditation can do, if you want to know if all that's true or not, you have to do this practice with full force, full heart. Otherwise, you don't get it, right? You get none of that. Sorry. Sorry. You don't get it. You don't get to have it. So, personally, if your mind's out of control, you get less of what you want. Interpersonally, others get less benefit if your mind's out of control. Religiously, spiritually, the final results of all of these systems and the more interesting parts of all of these systems, you don't get to experience those or see them or know if they're true either. Sorry. Now, on the other hand, personally, you know from experience, don't you, that in those times where your character has been good, mostly, right? Sort of like mostly with the negative ones, because sometimes good stuff happens from your negative emotions, and sometimes bad stuff happens from your positive things, right? Sometimes. But mostly, isn't it true that when you can get your own BS out of the way and you can put in the hard work at work, you can get the raise or the advancement at work. When you put in the hard work in your marriage gets better, generally speaking. When you put more thought and time and energy and all this into how you're going to raise your kids or deal with your animals or deal with the general thing, you get more out of your life for you. Things are better for you if your mind is under control. It's your character flaws, anger, attachment, anger, too much lust, too much too you're weak, the will is too weak, all of these things. This is mainly what's causing the problem. Yeah, the world can be tough, but most of our life has been not what we wanted because our character wasn't up to the task. So if our character was better through training the mind, we could get more of what we want just for us. Likewise, isn't it true that your family, your friends, your kids, your colleagues at work, if your mind was was in control and did what you wanted it to do, you could bring them so much more benefit because you could do what needs to be done for the sake of others. Instead of arrogance, the humility could be there. And you know when to be humble because you don't know, and you know when to be humble but also authoritative because you do know. And you're not confused very much about the two. And so on and so forth. Instead of the anger, patience, and so on and so forth. This means that others benefit more because your mind is trained. You benefit more because the mind is trained. How about spiritually and religiously? The consequences, positive consequences, the benefits of training and concentration means that at some time in the future, you get to know whether or not all this stuff from all these religions is true. You get to know, when I gain samadhi, do I really gain knowledge of past lives? Are all of these things right? Are all of these things how to say? All of these things are available to you potentially in the future because you're doing the thing that's required to know if they're true or not. And the ultimate results of all of these systems that say, that enlightenment is real or nirvana is real or these sorts of things, they say it depends upon your trained mind. And therefore, since you're training your mind with full force, you have a shot at getting that benefit and seeing if it's true and having those experiences and capabilities and cessations and so forth in the future. So now we have three really compelling reasons on each side. If you don't do the practice, keep it quiet in the chat if you can for a minute. This is really, really, really important. And somebody asked this question and is now talking rather than listening to the answer, which is not good. It's very bad. You need to listen to the answer if you ask a question. On the negative side, you don't get the stuff you want. Others you care about don't get the stuff they want, and you don't get the results of the ultimate outcome of the spiritual practices that you're doing if you don't do your 5-minute session today with full force of mind. Likewise, you do get the results of great spiritual practice. You do get the benefits for other beings, including all the ones you care about, and you do get the benefits for yourself if you do your 5-minute session today with extremely high intensity of concentration, exactly as it's described in the text, right? So, like this, before the session, this contemplation took whatever, 7 minutes, right? You think about the fact that everything you want, not in some hypothetical sense, not in some weird sense, not in some religious sense, in an extremely practical, down to earth sense, everything you want is riding on the next 5 minutes. Everything you don't want is riding on the next 5 minutes. Every cell in your body should be involved in this 5 minutes because absolutely everything that is of meaning and consequence that you care about is riding on this 5 minutes of actual intensity of my mind, right? So, like that, you can generate force because the why becomes very powerful. There are other tools too. For example, you're going to die and you're running out of time. Your lifespan's not getting any longer. And if it turns out that you cease to exist, it doesn't matter. But if it turns out that you don't cease to exist, this really matters, right? It's the only thing, in a sense, that really matters. If you lose contact with everything else when you die, the only baggage, the only luggage you get to take with you is your mind and the stuff you've done with your mind. That's the only luggage you're packing for the journey. So you're going to die. You don't know when it's going to happen. People die in the womb, and people die at 119 years old. You don't know when you're going. You have no idea. You have 5 minutes right now to make a difference forever for yourself, for the sake of other beings, for the sake of religious practice. You have 5 minutes right now to make a difference potentially forever for yourself and others, right? And you're running out of time to do it. You'll never get this chance again. You might get other chances, but you'll never get this one right now, 5 minutes, ever again. It will be gone 5 minutes from now. And if you do it half ass, if you don't do it with full heart, if you don't do it with full intensity, you missed the chance. There's this wonderful, wonderful thing from Dogen, and it captures the intensity of this. And I'm not going to quote him directly, I'm going to paraphrase. But he says something like, if you don't, if you haven't achieved realization in this moment, it's already too late. Do you understand? 100% of your being needs to be involved in the process. Sometimes in Zen they say you need to nail down the lid on your coffin. So this is another way of doing it, right? The only thing you get to take with you is your mind. If you're a person who's inclined to believe that life doesn't end at death, the only thing you're taking with you is your mind. So this is another way you can begin thinking about it, because it really sort of, this thought cuts out a lot of the bullshit, doesn't it? You might not be here tomorrow. You might not finish this live stream. You might not finish this conversation. This might be it. And if you wanted to accomplish something of meaning, the time is running out. You're going to spend 8 hours a day asleep. You're going to spend 2 hours a day eating. You're going to spend 30 minutes a day on the toilet. You're going to spend a bunch of time. You're going to spend a bunch of time doing entertainment and refreshing yourself from the effort of putting in work. You're going to spend 8 hours a day, 50 hours a week, whatever, working at some job. You're going to spend a whole bunch of time managing a whole bunch of affairs in the world. How much time is left to practice? Not very much. So you can think like this also, right? If it helps. If it just screws you up, don't think like this. Think the other way. But if it helps, you know, if it helps, then you can think like this also. I don't have much time. I need to make use of this 5 minutes since I'm sitting down to work on this thing. I need to do it with everything I have because maybe if I combine it all for the rest of my life, maybe I have like a year of practice left. Think about this, right? Maybe throughout the entire rest of my life, in terms of the time I have to devote to this, maybe I have a year of actual practice time if I'm lucky. Out of the remaining 40 years or 30 years or 20 years, should I live so long, maybe the combined total of the amount of time I have to practice within all this other stuff I have to do, maybe it's only a year. And today, I'm going to do 5 minutes of that year of time. And once that 5 minutes is gone, it's gone. I can't ever get it back, and time is running out. Do you see what I mean? So like this, you can build up layers to your motivation so that the why, so that the reason becomes more and more and more powerful and compelling, and it'll bring you to the cushion too, right? It'll be easier to get to the cushion if you're going, wow, everything I want is riding on this in this lifetime, for others, for the future. So it's really important that I do things that I think are meaningful and have benefit while I have time to do them. And while I'm doing them, it's really important that I'm effective, that I'm not just neurotically doing whatever because I'm freaked out about dying and I don't have enough time and, oh, I might die in 5 years, so I need to run off and do the most powerful this and this and this. You can't do that. You can't actually do the most powerful this and that because you're not a very capable person yet, according to not me, but according to the classics, right? Unless all of you are enlightened and you're just here to help me along. you know, just putting on a show so that I can accumulate some good karma. So yeah, like this, this comes from the Lam tradition. By the way, we were talking about stages of the path earlier. So this contemplation in terms of impermanence comes out of the Lamrim tradition. It's one of the motivational factors that comes at the early part of the path that gives you encouragement to do your practice. I'm going to die. I don't know when. My lifespan is getting shorter and shorter. The amount of time I have to practice, even while I'm alive, is extremely short. The only baggage I can pack, if life carries on after death, the only bags I can pack are here in the mind. If it's not in the mind, I can't bring it with me. Mm. Yeah. I mean, that's another aspect. Well, I don't know. This I teach this class mostly not as a Buddhist class, mostly as a secular class, although it creeps in from time to time. So just taking the vacation point and the uh, chance to meet the Dharma point. Part of the reason that if you're a Buddhist, for example, part of the reason you take a refuge commitment and you take the 5 precepts, the 5 individual liberation vows, pratimoksha vows, the reason you're taking that is because you want at least one more rebirth as good as this one to carry on with your practice next time. You need access to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. So you have refuge commitments that accumulate the karma of you meeting the Dharma again in the future. You're setting up the next life, so you have your bags packed. I'm going to meet the Dharma again. You have that bag packed. You don't kill because you want the next life to have long life and good health. If you're constantly sick or the body is not working well, etc., that's even less time to do your practice. If you die early, less time to do your practice. So maintaining pure ethics in terms of not killing, and also, if you can, supporting life. Doing things like saying, hey, go do some Lohan practice so that your body works really well. Maintain a reasonably good diet so that your body works well. You know, do some practices that make everything, because I'm supporting life. Supporting life has the karmic result of having a long life and good health in the future, which means my bags are packed. I'm ready to have a long life and good health next time so that I can do more practice and carry on with what I'm doing next time. Likewise, not stealing. You're going to need resources, right? If you're too poor, maybe if you're lucky, because all the other karma is there, you're very poor, but you have good teachers, you have a relatively good health, everything else is there, and you can still do it. But it would be easier if you had resources, not just money, but you had enough food, you had enough clothing, you had enough shelter, you had enough the resources to buy books and training materials and attend courses and travel to go see your teachers, and resources also in terms of free time. You have enough money and free time that you can go take a week or 2 weeks and go see your teacher if you need to or want to gain more teachings and more depth of practice, right? So you don't steal. So stealing leads to you not having the resources you need in a future life, so you don't steal. And instead, you try to do giving of various kinds so that in the future you have resources. And then sexual misconduct. So they say the result of sexual misconduct, besides really bad rebirths, is that you don't have reliable friends. You have unreliable friendships and so forth in the future. And because of all of that extra chaos, now again, it's more difficult to make progress because you're dealing with all the BS of the people around you, and they're unreliable and they're lying and they're doing this and they're taking advantage and right. So instead of that, you have stable relationships in the future. So you're putting that in the bank. I'm going to have a long life and good health. I'm going to have resources. I'm going to have stable friendships and relationships. And therefore, all of this is going to be supporting my refuge, which I've took, right? So now I have refuge packed in my bag. I'm going to meet the Dharma again, and I'll have these resources when I get there and to meet the Dharma. And then the last thing is I'm not going to consume, I'm not going to lie because I need correct information in the future, right? I, I need to access the truth in the future, and I need my mind to not be distorted and confused about the things that I'm hearing in the way that you distort and confuse your perception and your past experiences and so forth when you lie. So I want my mind to be extremely clear about the truth, and I want to have access to the truth, which means I'm not going to lie. So now I've packed that in my bag. And then finally, I need a mind that's extremely bright, sharp, discerning. I'm able to see the fine differences, the refined differences between things. And my behavior is heedful, meaning that I maintain how to say that I maintain consistency in my behavior, in my ethical decision making, and so forth. I'm reliable. My behavior is reliable. I don't one week feel like this and do a bunch of crazy stuff and I feel totally out of control, and then the next week I'm normal and fine again. Things are are more normalized. So like this, through not consuming intoxicants, the mind has discernment and is heedful, is more consistent in the next rebirth. So, like this, you've packed your bags. You know, if you just maintain your 5 precepts and your refuge commitments, you've packed your bags. You're ready to go when the plane departs. So this is why you take these vows, and then you can add on tons of other stuff. Well, if I'm humble, I'll seek out teachings. If I'm arrogant, I won't seek out teaching. So I'm going to cultivate humility. If I cultivate loving kindness and compassion, not everyone, but huge numbers of people will see me as helpful and beneficial, and they will help me and benefit me also. If I cultivate patience, I'll be able to endure great difficulties and accomplish great things because I have endurance to get through difficulties and pain and all sorts of things. If I cultivate joyful effort, then I'll be able to put in a great deal of effort spontaneously, hours of difficult, arduous, boring stuff. I can do it with joy and ease if I cultivate a mind that can do things like this. Concentration, training in concentration. Next time I'll have a mind that naturally has concentration and develops meditative concentration very easily. I'm putting that all in the bank. I'm putting it all in my luggage rather. And next time it's already packed. So yes, if you haven't done any training, then the odds of meeting it again are very low. If you take the opportunity, one of the brilliant things about the path is that you're now creating on purpose what the future conditions are going to be like. And therefore you're taking control of the future process. It's not random anymore. So this is part of the idea with your vows and then all the rest of the training, and it gets even more sophisticated as you go along. All the way up to the most sophisticated stuff in the tantras. How do you force yourself to act spontaneously? Creativity is one of the fundamental qualities of consciousness. So as you pull your awareness back and the mind is less and less and less acting out of predetermined habit for what you should do, because the mind is abiding in a condition that is the natural condition before the habits have occurred. And even when the suggestion of a habit, let's say, has occurred in the forefront of the mind, because it's not fully identifying with and getting wrapped up in that occurrence of, well, normally when this happens, I do this. Normally when that happens, I do that, right? Yes, those options still might be presented to your mind, but your mind sees it and can still go, no, I'm going to go this way instead. Yeah, I normally do that, but I'm going this way instead. Looking at the whole circumstance, that's not the way to go. This is the way to go, which is spontaneity, right? Instead of following the normal pattern, you go a different way for reasons that are related to reality, not just for to be random or something, right? That's not spontaneity. So like this, the fun one of the fundamental qualities of your mind, of your consciousness is creativity. So as you can pull back and get more and more in touch with what consciousness is, this ability to do things in an unexpected way for others that isn't following the normal pattern becomes more. But this doesn't mean you just do random stuff. It means that you are free to make a decision about what you're doing, more free, at least. Okay. Care to, okay. Heedful is one of those words. A lot of lost in translation. Yeah, heedful. Honestly, if I was going to teach a full thing on heedful, I'd want to look at the critical definitions again myself. But heedfulness has something to do with your ordinary moral, ethical process being in place. So if you've decided this is what I should do, this is what I shouldn't do, based upon reasons, evidence, observation, experience, you know that doing this is not what you should be doing and won't help you, won't help others. You know that this is what you should be doing, will help you, will help others, right? This is skillful, this is unskillful. that your heedfulness is your ability to actually do that. And sometimes we do this, don't we? Where you go, I know I shouldn't do this because it's not going to help me or help anyone else. I'm gonna do it anyway. That's not heedful. Okay. At least this is my understanding of heedful, and I'm not a great expert on the term, but this is at least for the moment how I interpret it. So someone might correct me on that if I'm using it improperly. Yes, expand positive karma virtues, merit, increasing suffering, decreasing happiness. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay. Yeah, so we covered that a bit. Uh so Lang, what I would say about that is this. If you're in retreat and you try to do 10 hours a day of intensive breath practice, you'll probably start, you'll probably get a bloody nose. You'll probably get intense headaches. You'll probably collapse from exhaustion halfway through the day. So if you're going to go into retreat and do a ton of practice, you can't do it the way I'm describing. It's not the right technique to do 10 hours a day of practice. Even in the texts where they recommend doing something like intensive breath practice, they say do 16 5-minute sessions a day. So you have 55 minutes in between each session to recover from that effort of doing 5 minutes. See what I mean? So a more common advice for being in intensive retreat, 8 hours, 10 hours, 12 hours, 16 hours a day of practice, is very, very, very gentle attention. Again, just calm down, mind. Calm down. Just try to stay with the. Oh, you're not staying with the breath again. Okay, okay. Relax, relax. Come back. Come on. Come back over here. Oh, you're running away again. Okay, no problem, no problem. Take your time, but come back when you can. you know, because after 3 days of doing that, the mind will be calm because you've done nothing to stir it back up in between, and you're just building up the habit really gently of no, no, no. Come on, come back. Stay with me here, right? So you can use very, very gentle intent in retreat in an intensive environment to great effect. But also in retreat, like I said, if you want to supercharge the process, you could start a few sessions. You do intensive breath when the mind's not behaving itself. And then instead of just sort of screwing around for the remaining 40 minutes of the first session of the day or whatever, the mind is already having a good session within 5 minutes. So you don't have to pick. You can do both, where you get the mind into a good quality with 5 minutes of intensive breath, 10 minutes of body scanning. Okay, there's 45 minutes left in the first session for the day. Now I'm going to do the thing I'm supposed to be doing, which is whatever, normal pranayama or, you know, I don't know, the various practices involved in the retreat that you're in, including things like deity practices if you're doing tantric retreat. Okay, can you explain how meditations are beneficial to combating the three poisons? Yeah, I'll do that, and that'll be the last question, unless somebody puts a really compelling question in the chat. Please don't do that. Okay, so greed, ignorance, hatred. Okay, so think about it like this: just by brute force, if your mind isn't generating the normal content it would generate, those are going to decrease. Ignorance ignorance a little bit less, right? Ignorance is probably still going to be there, but there are certain layers you've put on top of ignorance that won't be there because they're just conceptual noise. They're just concepts and ideas and so forth that you're mixing with your perceptual experiences. But there are some things that are perceptual that are wrong, right? This is the big sort of the big revelation of Buddhist stuff is not that we're negating the Hindu position or something, which is an intellectually acquired position from a Buddhist standpoint, if we're using the Buddhist definition for what that is, which is not the ones modern Hindus agree on. They think the self is something quite different from what we're describing, blah 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 blah, right? But anyways, the point is this: if you make the mind extremely lucid, extremely calm, then it's not generating anger. It's not generating hatred, and whatever levels of ignorance have been enhanced by your conceptual activities that are normally enhancing your ignorance are less or they're not there. And so just training in concentration alone starts to undo some of the problems. But it's sort of by brute force until you apply antidotes that overcome those problems. Concentration's a general antidote, and I believe it's got, what are the two types? There's directly directly confronting antidote and a suppressing antidote, I think, are the two. I think that's the name. So a directly confronting antidote meets something head on and actually damages that thing and makes it less because it's replacing it. So this would be like your patience, or maybe your humility training. Your training to actually develop humility. When the humility is there and becomes more powerful, it actually replaces the arrogance, so that the arrogance becomes less because you are becoming more humble. And these two can't live together. It directly confronts the problem. Concentration is a suppressing antidote, which is not like Western suppression. This is not like, I'm just going to keep the emotions inside. That's not what we're talking about. What it means is that when the concentration is there, those things don't come up. When you stop having the concentrations, all of them can come up again, exactly the way that they were. So if you're super angry person, while you're in a state of concentration on your cushion, the anger can't come up because it has been made dormant. You're not like sitting there going, "But anger, don't come up," right? That's not, it's not suppression like in Western psychology. It's simply that the anger itself becomes dormant because it hasn't been triggered, right? You're in a condition where the anger can't be triggered. And so the concentration is a general suppressing antidote that puts your negative mental states into a potential state instead of being arising into an actual thing. So like this, you can use concentration as a general antidote to a huge number of problems. So actually this is why, if you learn to meditate on the five external senses, and you learn to meditate on consciousness, and you learn to meditate on all five of the external ones simultaneously, and then all six including consciousness all at the same time, it's like a big sword that cuts through your negative emotions, because now you can generate concentration and cut through the exaggerations of ignorance, because ignorance is there even in concentration. But you can cut through the exaggerations that come through from conceptual thought, doing anything with a general antidote that makes negative emotions move into a potential state instead of a manifest state. And not by going, oh, I shouldn't be angry, but the anger doesn't get triggered because of the way that your mind is cognitively engaging with visual experience, for example. Why? Because to get angry, the mind needs to zoom in on this thing and go, the qualities of this are really pissing me off. But if the mind zooms out and takes in the entire sensory field and generates bliss because it's experiencing the whole field in a non dual awareness of vision, and someone's yelling at you and insulting you and telling you that you have terrible quality, like the guy that was here a couple days ago. People go through the chat occasionally and say silly things. But and so you're reading the thing and they're insulting you and doing this and doing that, and you just zoom out and the bliss is there and you go, yeah, that guy sounds terrible. That guy you're describing sounds terrible. Yeah, if it was like that, yeah, I'd be with you. So if you can keep the mind in a concentrated state where it hasn't zoomed in on one aspect of experience and started to exaggerate the qualities of that one thing, because you can enter a state of non-dual awareness on any of your senses whenever you want, when it's relevant, then you have a general antidote to most of your negative mental states. So this is why Mahamudra style practice, what I call Foundation 4, is so powerful. Well, one of the reasons. Lots of reasons it's very powerful, but this is one. It provides you with a general antidote to a huge number of negative mental states. Okay. All right, my friends. I think that will be it. Since it's getting a bit late, still have some practice and so forth to do of my own today. Thank you all for being here. I know we had a bit of a long session today. It's quite long. It's like 2.5 hours. So hopefully there was some benefit. All right. Hope to see you again soon.